Hello. I'd like to tell you about my misfortune I had with both my husband and son. Well, I haven't had much luck in general throughout my life. Somehow, I've made it through life up until this point. I'm a 70-year-old woman from a very small town in Middle America. I had only ever known the people who were the small town I grew up in. I didn't really interact with anyone besides them. When I was young, I figured this must be how people live everywhere in the country. I had no other basis of comparison. The first few years of my life were pretty uneventful, to be honest. You'd think living such a simple life would mean 70 years would feel like an eternity. Well, yes and no. To be quite honest, I don't think it's even possible for anyone else to make it 70 years if they face the despair and hardships I have. When I was 25 years old, I met my husband after we were set up on a blind date. We had only 3 dates before we got married. You might think that's too fast, but he was nice, funny, and came from a good family. I didn't see any reason to wait. He was my ideal man. His parents seemed just as wonderful as he was. They were so loving and kind, which was rare for parents to be back then. I didn't have parents, so they loved me as if I were their real daughter. I felt so blessed to have them. 3 months after we got married, I got pregnant with my son. I was the happiest I had ever been and patiently waited for the day I could see his cute little face. I couldn't think about anything else. All I cared about was meeting my precious baby boy. Fast forward a few years. My son was already 5 years old. I remember the day that my husband didn't come home from work when he was supposed to. Something felt off. I knew that sometimes he'd work late, but that would usually only be for an extra hour or two. It was already past 10 p.m. He'd never worked this late, especially without letting me know. I was really worried. The next morning, he still wasn't home. 2 days later, he still hadn't come back. I contacted my mother and father-in-law. We agreed that it would be a good idea to file a missing person report with the police. The police said they'd start to look for him, but it didn't seem like they were taking it seriously. I wasn't confident they'd do a good job. My son wanted to see his daddy. He cried himself to sleep every night waiting for his dad to come back. I was going to the police station every few days to see if there were updates. It wasn't until a year later that I finally heard something. I was devastated when they told me the news. Apparently, as my husband was coming home from work, he was the victim of a random act of violence. He was murdered. They finally found his remains deep in the mountains where someone had dumped his body. He was found by a resident of a nearby town, and it was reported to the police. As I was listening to what the police officer was telling me, all I could think about was how my son would never see his dad, who was his idol and whom he loved more than anything in the world, ever again. My heart was crushed. I held my son and wept. Soon after, I went to my parents-in-law's house to let them know what happened. I told them the police say Randy was murdered. His remains were found in the woods. What are little Tommy and I going to do? How am I supposed to raise him without a father? How are we supposed to live? My mother-in-law put her head in her hands and wept. She said, "I just lost my son. I can't possibly answer that question. How could you ask me something like that at a time like this? What's going through your head to come here and ask me something like that? How are you going to live? That's your responsibility to figure out, not ours. You put food on the table and save money. It's that simple. How dare you ask me that seconds after you tell me my son is dead? I have to figure out how I'm going to break the news to my husband. No one knows what's going to happen now that he's gone. We can't change the fact that he's gone. I'll make one thing clear, though. We are not going to raise that child for you. We aren't going to solve your problems for you. In fact, don't come back here ever again." She chased me out of her house. I was only 30 at the time. I was 30 years old, in the prime of my life, and I was widowed. I had no idea what I was going to do for me and my little boy. I sat And I tried to come up with some sort of plan about how we were going to get through this, but it was pointless. I was totally lost. I felt like we were doomed. One day, the woman next door saw me moping around and said something that changed my perspective on the situation. "I see you with your eyes to the ground every day. You look like a lost puppy. You need to understand, your husband is not coming back. Those who are alive need to get busy living. Do you plan on living like this forever? You need to get up and start making changes. Get out there and start earning money to raise your child. I have a friend who owns a restaurant. Do you want me to ask if they're hiring?" I was so thankful. I snapped out of it. "Thank you so much. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll work anywhere and do anything. Yes, please ask your friend. I'll do anything, even if it's just washing dishes or taking out the trash." She let her friend know about me, and I met with her the next day. She was so kind and understanding of my situation. They offered me a job and even said it was okay if I brought my son in while I was working. Somehow, my mother-in-law heard about me getting a job. Up until now, I had been living in an apartment building she was the landlord for. I was living there with my husband for free. Once she heard about me getting a job, she said I couldn't live there anymore and I had to find my own place. The owner of the restaurant and her husband heard about this. They said how cruel of her to kick you out onto the streets like that, especially in the dead of winter. If you want, you can stay with us. We have a finished basement we used to rent out to people. We just have to get it straightened up first, but it should be enough space for you and your son. Don't worry about rent. You have enough on your plate already. Just focus on living a good life with your little boy. I moved in not too long after. My son and I lived there for nearly 10 years. By then, he had already started his first year in high school. I was able to save up some money from working in the restaurant. I found a little house that we could afford to rent out. Living in that basement apartment was fine for a while, especially when my son was little. We spent nearly every waking second with one another, but he wasn't a little kid anymore. He was a teenager, and he needed a space of his own. One day he said to me, "Mom, why are we living in this run-down house? Are we poor? All of my friends' lives are totally different. They have a dad that goes to work every day and a mom that stays home and tends to their house. Why are we living like this? You're working like a slave. I don't want to live here anymore. It's embarrassing. I don't want any of my friends to find out this is what my life's like. When I grow up, there's no way my life is going to be like this. We need to find a way to get enough money to get out of this musty old place." He'd say something like this to me nearly every day. I thought maybe it was teenage angst that was making him feel that way. But it was the truth, and it really hurt me to hear it. When he turned 17, he dropped out of high school. He packed his bags and left the house. Over a month had passed before I heard from him again. He had run away for short periods of time before, but this was the first time he'd ever been gone this long. I was so worried. I finally got a call from him. It was the first time I heard his voice since he left. I picked up the phone and felt a slight sense of relief. That was until I heard him say, "Mom, it's me. He just called to ask for money." I asked frantically, "Where are you? I've been so worried about you. Where are you and what are you doing? I just want to know. It would make me feel so much better. I haven't heard your voice in over a month and the first time you call me? You ask for money? Is that all you're concerned with?" He said, "Sending me money is the least you could do. Are you going to do it or not? You must have been able to save some money since I left. Don't try and act like you're going to teach me a lesson about money. Could you, even if you wanted to? You've worked like a dog and barely made enough to stay afloat. Whatever. I'm in the city. Just give me some money. If you don't, I might die. Send it to me right now. I'll give you my bank account info." I took it as a bit of a threat that if I didn't give him the money, there would be consequences. He was trying to play on my emotions to get money out of me. That was the first time I sent my son money. I sent him nearly $1,000. Every time he ran out of money, he'd call me up again and be pushy until I sent him some. I should have seen that coming. 3 years passed since he started taking advantage of me. He knew I wouldn't say no to him, so he kept preying on me. But to be honest, it was the only way I had to get in touch with him. If he didn't call me to ask for money, I'd have no way of knowing if he was alive or dead. It was my only connection with him, albeit an unhealthy one. But he was my only son. And I still cared about him. I still had no idea about what his life was like. He said he was living in the city, but I didn't know where exactly or what he was even doing with his life. He never told me any of that when he'd call for money. All he'd say was how much he wanted out of me. Eventually, his calls stopped. I wondered if he'd finally found a job. I grew older, and it had been years since I heard from him. He was my only son. Of course I worried about him, but he was making poor life choices and he was headed down a dark path. I thought it would best for me not to see him anyway. Before I knew it, 10 years had passed since he left home. I came to terms with the fact that I'd probably never see him again. One night when I came home from work, I saw a large figure standing outside my house. He was just kind of pacing back and forth. Even though I was about 20 feet away, I knew immediately it was my son. I called out his name, Tommy. "Is that you?" He started walking towards me. I couldn't believe I was seeing him after all this time. He took one look at me and said, "Mom, what are you wearing? You've really gotten old. I can't believe you go out in public like that. Everyone probably laughs at you. I bought you some new clothes and makeup. Try it on when you go back inside. You've gotten so thin since I last saw you. The clothes might be a little baggy on you. Let's get inside so you can try them on." I said to him, "You show up for the first time in 10 years? And that's the first thing you say to me?" I was emotionally torn seeing him. I was angry for him being gone this time, but on the other time, I was so relieved to finally see him again. Did I miss anything while I was gone? It doesn't seem like it. There's a reason why I came back. I have a girlfriend that I plan on marrying. Her name is Lauren. No matter what you say, I'm going to be marrying her. She has a great family. You have to eventually go and meet her family before we get married. But not if you're looking like this. That's why I bought you all of this stuff. You better go to the salon or something before you meet them. You understand what I'm saying, right? If you show up looking like you live in a cave, it's going to be so embarrassing for me. Get yourself together." He handed me the shopping bag full of stuff he had with him. I opened it up to find a stunning sparkly dress. The kind you see a celebrity wear on the red carpet. "Where did you buy a dress like this? I can't wear something this fancy. I wouldn't feel comfortable in it." My son got a little irritated. "Mom, just put it on. Do you have any idea how much I paid for that? That dress cost more than your entire wardrobe combined." I'm going to write down the name of a restaurant. That's where we're going to meet my girlfriend's parents next week. I think it'll take around 3 hours or so to get there. Don't be late. Do you understand? Don't embarrass me. I had so many questions for him about the person he was planning to marry. Where is she from? What does she do for a living? Before I could ask any of that, my son had already turned around and started walking away. I couldn't believe it. I had seen my son again, and he was getting married. I was terribly nervous to meet his future wife's family. But at the same time, I was curious about what kind of person she was. I just wished he would have stayed longer so I could talk with him more. He showed up for the first time in 10 years and only stayed around for 3 minutes. A week passed, and I went to meet with his girlfriend and her family. His future wife and her family were all kind and warm people. I got along with them really well. As I was about to go home, my son's fiancée grabbed me by the arm and said, I'm so sorry it's taken so long to meet you. I've wanted to meet you for so long. I've tried to persuade Tommy to agree to meet you, but he never agreed. He said you live too far away and it would be a pain to go and meet you. For so long I've tried, but he kept telling me no. I should have tried harder. I'm sorry it took this long. I hope you understand. Her words warmed my heart. Unlike my son, she's wanted to see me this whole time. I was moved by her honesty and sincerity. Don't worry about little old me. As long as you two are happy, that's all that matters. I'm not important enough of a person for you to come all your way out to meet. I didn't even do much for Nick growing up. He practically raised himself. There's no need to apologize. All I want is for you two to live happily together. That's the only thing that matters to me. I left her with that and made my way back home. I thought about my son's fiancée the entire bus ride, and even after I got back home. She had such a kind, gentle face. It was like she was an angel who descended down onto earth. How could her family have raised her so perfectly? I could tell just by the way she presented herself that she was brought up with love and care by her family. She was graceful and constantly smiling. As pleasant as the meeting was, I couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed being with her parents. I got the impression that we were around the same age. You wouldn't be able to tell that by looking at us, though. My face was covered in wrinkles, and they looked about 10 years younger. I finally got a glimpse into my son's life. Not only was it reassuring to know he was doing all right, it felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders knowing he was getting married. It was the first time in a while I could breathe a sigh of relief. Technically, he was still my son, but after 10 years of not seeing each other, I felt we were more like acquaintances. I foolishly hoped that things would go right back to normal once we finally saw each other again. I should have known that was impossible. I'm grateful that he still felt I was important enough to him to meet his fiancée and her family before they got married. Not to mention inviting me to their beautiful wedding. The night after their wedding was the first time I talked with my new daughter-in-law on the phone. Mom, you look beyond beautiful today. Tommy and I are about to head out on our honeymoon. I wasn't used to having communication with someone. I was overjoyed she was thoughtful enough to talk with me. I hope you both have the time you lives. Have a safe flight. When you get back, come over to visit anytime. I'll make you both a delicious dinner. I hung up the phone with a big smile running across my face. A few days after they got home from their honeymoon, I got a call from my daughter-in-law. For the first time, they both came over to my house. In fact, it was the first time I had ever invited any over to where I lived. I tried to make it look as good as possible, but there's only so much I could do to make an old house that's falling apart look presentable. In the end, I made a conscious decision not to break my back trying to get the place looking nice. I wanted to show them an honest representation of how I was living. I didn't want to fabricate what my life was really like. The second they arrived, my son reacted exactly how I thought he would. Mom, look at this place. This is so embarrassing. This is exactly why I didn't want to come over here. Why don't you ever listen to me? He seemed pretty agitated about the state the house was in. His wife laid her hand on his shoulder. I've been really interested in what your life was like, Mom. It must be so peaceful out here in the countryside. My grandmother used to live in a house like this a long time ago. It makes me remember when I would go to her house when I was a little girl. Do you think it would be okay if we stayed the night? I was nearly in tears hearing that. After all the years I spent raising my son, it felt like it was nothing compared to how wonderful his wife was. Their personalities were like night and day. I'd be delighted to have you stay over as long as it's okay with you both. I cleared out and straightened up the spare room, just in case. I also went out to the market to go grocery shopping for dinner. I'm a really good cook. Believe it or not. I'll take care of everything. All you two need to worry about is eating until you're stuffed. I made my way into the kitchen and started working on dinner. My daughter-in-law finished a full plate of food faster than my son and I. She was grinning from ear to ear as she asked for seconds. I was ecstatic that she liked my cooking. After dinner, I started to clean up and start the dishes. She came up to me and said, "Mom, don't worry about any of this. I could tell that you have a little trouble being on your feet for too long. I'll take care of the dishes. You go sit down and rest." She started to clean up the kitchen. "I can't have you do all of this. You're the guest. Please, leave all of this to me. What would your parents think of me if I put you to work? You came all the way out here to see me. Sit down and relax. I'm about to put out some desserts. I hope you still have some room." She wouldn't budge. She looked at me with a concerned look on her face and said, "Mom, it hurts me a little to hear you say that. I'm your daughter now. I care about you and I want to make things easier for you. You're one of the kindest people I've ever met. I know I haven't known you for that long, but you already mean so much to me. I have no idea how Tommy got so grumpy and rebellious. I can't understand how he turned out the way he did when he has such a loving, sweet mother like you. Do you mind if I come to visit often?" she asked affectionately. It felt like the first time in forever that I heard laughter in the house. I don't remember the last time I was in such a good mood. From then on, my daughter-in-law would come to stay with me alone on her days off. She even gave me a hand on the little farm I had out back. I always sent her home with bags of fresh vegetables. 5 years passed since they got married. My daughter-in-law had come over for one of her visits. It was then she said, "Mom, I really love coming to stay with you and all, but the trip is really a lot. You live so far from us. I was thinking about bringing your grandson over with me this time, but I know he'd get car sick." She seemed exhausted as she was saying this to me. It was the dead of summer. The two of us were sitting on the couch with the ceiling fan circling above us. She paused. I could tell she had something on her mind. Then she stood up and said, "Mom, what do you say we get you out of this old house and you come live with us? You'd be able to see your grandson every day. Little Vincent would be so happy to see his grandma. All I ask is that you watch him every once in a while. What do you think?" I could tell she was sincere. She looked at me with concern, waiting for my reply. I said to her, "I can't possibly accept that offer. Seeing you every once in a while like we do now is perfect. If we lived together, I'd just be a burden on you. I'm afraid it might strain our relationship. I like living here. Thank you for your offer, but I'm going to stay here." That wasn't the last time my daughter-in-law tried to get me to live with them. Every time I'd tell her I didn't have the energy to keep with my grandchild for the whole day or that I liked the simple life I had in the countryside. I declined every time she brought it up. Around the time when my grandson started elementary school, my legs were in real pain. I had to go into the city to get knee surgery. It was a lot of work to get into the hospital. I had to take a taxi to the bus station, then take a bus to a train station. Once I got off my long train ride, I had to take another taxi to get to the hospital. I had to do this 2 or 3 times a month, all while in moderate pain. It really took all my strength to get to my appointments. After my surgery, I agreed to live with my son and his wife just until my knee felt good enough for me to make it home on my own. My daughter-in-law felt so relieved and delighted to have me around. My son was a different story. "I really don't think you should be staying with us. We don't have the room for you here. If I'm being honest, I'm pretty uncomfortable with you being here after being apart for so long. It's wearing me out. I want you out of here as soon as you can walk again. I don't make enough to support another mouth to feed in this house. If you actually had money to pay for yourself, it would be a different story. I can't afford to keep you here." He talked to me like I was such a burden to him. I felt so unwanted in this especially difficult time for me. My daughter-in-law came to my defense. "How dare you talk to her like that? She's your own mother. She's not going to live with us forever. She even said herself that's not what she wants. She's staying with us until she gets better. That's what you and I both decided. I think we can afford to have her stay with us for the time being. If that's what financially ruins us, we were doomed already. Plus, where else could she go if she didn't stay here? Treat your mother with love and respect. She would do the same for you in a heartbeat. Isn't that right, Mom? I was so grateful she came to my side. However, at the same time, I felt even more uncomfortable than I did before. My son clearly wanted nothing to do with me and hated every second I was staying with him. All I wanted was to go home as soon as possible. Unfortunately, my knee was taking longer than expected to heal itself, so I couldn't go home so easily. I was stuck at my son's house for the time being. As much as he hated it and how uncomfortable I felt, I had no choice but to stay. During that time, I watched my grandson nearly every day. I was glad to spend time with him, but it took a lot out of me. I think it ended up delaying my recovery a bit. The original plan was for me to stay until I was fully recovered. As time went on, though, it became harder and harder to end up leaving. During the time I was there, they had their second baby. Time was going by so fast. Before I knew it, I had already turned 60. When did I get that old? You'd think it would be the opposite, but the older I got, the worse my son treated me. After he'd get home from work, he'd say things like, "What's that awful smell? It never smelled this bad before you started staying here, Mom. It smells like old people. It's making me sick." He'd lie and say electric bill was really expensive. He'd use that as an excuse to leave the windows open in the dead of winter when I was home alone. He never turned on the heat when it was only me in the house. I was self-conscious in case he was telling the truth, so I made sure to wash my body carefully. When I'd get out of the shower, my son would say to me, "You didn't use hot water, did you? This isn't your house. Every second you use hot water, it's money being wasted. We're trying to cut back. You never gave me any money growing up. You think it's okay to use other people's money after how cheap you are? You're like a termite. All you do is use and give nothing back. You need to take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror." I took his abuse every day, but kept quiet. My daughter-in-law would argue with him about the way he was treating me. She told him about 100 times to stop mistreating me. He never stopped, though. Eventually, it seemed like his behavior started rubbing off on my grandson. He started to ask me things like, "Grandma, you don't have a house. Why are you here every day?" I wanted desperately to leave that environment. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take the abuse from my son, and I didn't want to wait around to see my grandson turn into his father. There was only one thing keeping me in that house: my angel of a daughter-in-law. She cared for me as if I was her real mother. I would never have been able to make it through without her help. Whenever she'd hear my son start complaining or insulting me, she'd run into the room and defend me. "Mom, don't listen to anything he says. His job's been really tough lately, and he's just taking his frustration out on you. It's so childish. If only we had a time machine to go back and teach him some manners when he was a child. How on earth could he have turned out so bitter? I have no idea how he could be so rude towards you. She was my voice when I didn't have the courage to speak up to my son. She was feisty, and she always spoke her mind about how badly he was treating me. You're being so selfish and rude to her. You, of all people, need to get in the shower and wash off that bad attitude. And when you do, make sure to not use too much hot water. You need to leave some for your mother. How could you blame her for the water or electric bills being so high? You're the reason it's so high every month. Don't try and say she's the reason for all our money going to the bills when it's really because of you." She said exactly what I wished I had the strength to say. Things went on like that for the time being. I remember one day when I heard them fighting in another room. Something was different that day. My son wasn't screaming his head off like he usually was. Instead, I heard my daughter-in-law's exhausted voice doing most of the talking. "Tommy, explain this. Don't try and lie to me. The credit card bill is over $5,000. What could you have possibly spent that much on? How could you have spent this much on a night out drinking? I found this in your wallet too." I Googled the address that was written on the back. It's the address to a strip club, isn't it? Why would you go to a strip club? Please tell me this is a mistake. I know you would never do something like this to me and your family. Was this a secret bachelor party or something? Did one of your friends drag you there? Tell me the truth. He shook his head and said, "You're being so obnoxious." What's your problem? I went to a strip club. So what? You've let yourself go. When was the last time you put on makeup or even looked in the mirror? Look at the way you present yourself. Every day I come home to my ugly wife and my old smelly mother stuffing their faces with the slop you expect me to eat too. Do you really expect me to want to spend my time in this house? Let's be honest. You haven't put in an ounce of effort to look good for me since we've gotten married. You've turned into a cow since I put a ring on your finger, and I haven't seen you touch makeup in years. You must be crazy if you think I'm still interested in you. I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. He crossed the line. I threw open the door and went to my daughter-in-law's side like she's done for me time and time again. How dare you say that to her? What gives you the right to act like this? Going out and spending that kind of money and saying such hateful things to your own wife? You've never once said thank you to her for all the work she does around the house. She can barely remember to eat. She's so busy throughout the day. And you want her to sit down and put on makeup? Why do you think you deserve that? You should be ashamed of yourself. I grabbed my son by the shoulder and shook him as I let out weeks of frustration. He shoved me backwards, then started to direct his attacks at me. You think you know anything about my life? Don't pretend like you know anything. You sound so stupid. I really don't want to keep asking you this. When are you finally going home? You knee seems fine to me. Just get out of my hair already. I'm sick of you being here. I swear every woman in my life is a burden. That includes you two. You're nothing but headaches. You're not gonna like what I'm about to say, but listen closely. I don't want to live in this house anymore. I don't love you anymore. I don't want to be bothered with raising kids. It's a waste of my time. I told you 1,000,000 times I didn't want my mom here, but you never listened. I never wanted kids, but you didn't listen to that either. What makes you think I ever wanted to support 4 other people? I'm done with this life. I'm throwing in the towel here. That goes for you too, Mom. I should never reached out to you. Once I get a divorce, I'm absolutely not going to look after you. I want to make myself as clear as possible. Honestly, even if we didn't get a divorce, I still don't want to waste another second of my life thinking about you, let alone living with you. I hate being in the same house as you. That's why I left all those years back. I haven't changed how I felt. Now you're here leeching off of me. What have you ever done for me? You mooch off me for money and food. You're like a parasite. This is what's going to happen next. I'm going to put you in a nursing home. It costs around the same as it does to have you leave here. Only now I won't have to deal with you every day. Once we get divorced, you'll have no one to be your servant anymore. I'd go into the nursing home if I were you. I've heard about other parents that don't want to burden their children and go into nursing homes on their own. You're too stubborn to do that, aren't you? I'd heard enough. I left the room and slammed the door behind me. I bit my tongue for so many things since I started living with my son. I kept my nerve no matter how much he insulted me or mistreated me. Telling me I was going to be put into a nursing home was the last straw. My head felt like it was going to pound out of my chest. Had I really gotten that old that a nursing home was on the table? I was like an old rug to my son. He had no room for me, so he was going to toss me aside. That conversation kept me up for the next few nights. I didn't leave my room since that day. I didn't even come out to eat. My daughter-in-law would come in to check on me. Mom, forget about what he said. When he's in a bad mood, he can say some pretty hurtful thing, but I bet you know that more than anyone. I felt a little better after talking with her, but the weight in my heart remained. My son's behavior got worse and worse as the days went on. He started having an affair. He made it so obvious that even I could tell what was going on. It may have been cynical to think about things this way, but if he was going to be this reckless with the emotions of the ones who care for him, I thought it was better to just get a divorce so Lauren could find someone new and start a new life with someone who makes her happy. In reality, having 2 children made that hard to do. This went on for another 5 years. Lauren and I turned a blind eye to my son's unacceptable behavior. There came a point where we couldn't sit back and let him get away with it any longer. Lauren came to me and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I know what I'm going to do is wrong, but I can't take living with him for another second. I tried to stay strong for you and kids for so long. I feel horrible for doing this. I know it's not the right choice, but it's the choice I have to make. He's treating me like I don't even exist. He's having an affair right in front of me. He's not even trying to hide it. I put up with all of it for so long, but I can't keep pretending like everything is okay. There are times that I wished I were dead. Every night when he comes home, I can smell that other woman's perfume on his clothes. Every time I do the laundry, I see her lipstick on his collar. It's like an advertisement that he's happily cheating on me. I've put up with it and did my best to pretend like nothing was wrong for 5 whole years. I foolishly thought he'd change and turn back into the person I fell in love with when we first met. He clearly has no intentions of changing. I'm so stupid for holding on to that idea for as long as I have. I'm sorry, Mom. I just can't take it anymore." She buried her face into my shoulder and cried her eyes out. "Lauren, I understand. To be honest, I think it's for the best. I want you to end this nightmare and go out to find someone new. Please. Find someone who will make you happy and have the life of happiness you deserve. Tommy is a lost cause. He's loved by everyone around him, but he doesn't care. He's throwing his life away by being so selfish. There's nothing more we can say or do to change him. One of the biggest regrets that I'll carry with me to my grave is that I couldn't do more to raise him into someone who cares for others. Don't waste another minute. If you're going to leave, do it right away so you can start your new life. It's not just for you. It's for the kids, too. Please don't worry about me at all. Do whatever you need to do." They got a divorce not long after. That left me with no place to stay. I didn't think I could have made the long trip back home. And even if I could, I wouldn't have been able to take care of myself on my own. My son got his wish. I was put into an assisted living facility near his house. I lived in a room with 6 other residents. You may think that would be a lot to handle. But to be honest, it was such a better living environment compared to when I was living with my son. After getting to know some of the other residents, I learned some of them came from a similar situation as me. Some of them were abandoned by their family and left with nowhere else to go, or no one to look after them. Most people had been living there for a few months and they all enjoyed their lives. I became close with another resident that lived in the same room as me. Her name was June. She was admitted 2 days earlier than I was. She was around the same age as I was. She was friendly, and I enjoyed talking with her throughout the day. We became really good friends in a short span of time. Personality-wise, we had a lot of things in common. However, after getting to know her, it was very clear our lives up to that point couldn't have been more different. She was the only good friend I had. We spent most of our days sitting and talking with one another. I told her about my life, about my son. I opened up about everything that happened to me. I told her everything. Hearing this, she rested her hand on mine and said, "Oh, dear, you've been through so much, haven't you? Your son should have treated you better after you did for him when he was young. How could he be so cruel to you? He's so unsympathetic and unloving to you. If it were anyone else, it would be the obvious choice to cut them out of your life. It's not so easy to do when that person is your son. I can imagine the pain you feel in your heart. I think you're an incredible person for getting through it all. Not to mention all the years you spent apart from the son you love. Doing it all without a husband, no less. You're one of the strongest people I know. I'd never have been able to get through what you have. You're truly amazing. She touched my heart with her kind words. I hadn't felt that comforted since talking with Lauren. Talking with June every day made me forget about the pain I've experienced in my life. Before I knew, a few months passed since I started living at the facility. It dawned on me that we spent most of that time talking about my life. I barely knew about what her life was like. Enough about me. I really want to hear more about what your life has been like. June laughed and said, "Me? My life hasn't been that exciting. The most eventful thing was getting thyroid surgery to remove my cancer. The doctors told me to rest. But when I was home, I couldn't help but try and keep myself busy with my job. I didn't want to make my children worry about me. So instead of staying home, I decided to start living here. I figured while I recovered, I could stay here and have the nice nurses help me until I'm fit enough to get back on my feet. I told my family I'd stay here until I was fully recovered, then go back home. That's about all I have to say about my life. It seems pretty uneventful compared to your life. I think they should make a movie about the things you've gone through. I led a simple life and had a normal family. Sorry, but that's the extent of my life." She made it seem like having a normal life was a bad thing. I was so jealous of her. Sometimes her husband would come to visit her to have lunch together. Her children would send her some of her favorite foods and fruits with cute little handwritten notes that said, "Don't eat all of it yourself. Make sure to give some to your nice doctors and nurses." I couldn't help but be envious of her. Those times I thought about my selfish son, who stuck me in here and who I haven't heard from since. 3 months have passed since I started living at the facility. My only friend left the care facility. She said she was fully recovered and wanted to get back to work. I admired her tenacity. We were nearly the same age, but I couldn't imagine myself working like she was. I was so grateful to meet such a wonderful woman who I could call my friend. Unfortunately, that made it harder to say goodbye. On the other hand, I was so happy for her that she was surrounded by a loving family that would take care of her. As we said our goodbyes, she grabbed my hand and said, "Let's keep in touch. We should go out for lunch sometime soon." Fate brought us together here, of all places. I'll never forget the time we spent together. She handed me a slip of paper with her phone number written on it. I think it was about a month later when I got a surprise visitor. It was my son. I had no idea what he was doing there. It had been months since hearing from him. I knew he wanted something from me. There's no way he was dropping by just to say hello. He didn't come empty-handed. He brought a shopping bag with him just like the one he brought before I met Lauren. I asked him, "Why did you bring that? Are you getting married again?" To my surprise, he answered, "Yes, I am. I met someone special. I want to start over and give marriage another shot. Living on my own after having been married wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. My girlfriend knows about my divorce and she's fine with it. Her parents know about my past too. They're very understanding. They even said people these days will get divorced over anything." I hated his arrogance as he was talking with me. I hit him on the arm and told him, "Yeah, I bet she told you a lot of stuff. You just got divorced. You're already planning on getting married again. What does she possibly see in you that would make her want to get married? I have absolutely no idea what she likes about you. Does she know about how you stuck me in this facility because you didn't want to look after me? If she's even a halfway decent person, she'd be appalled at the way you've treated me. Do they have any idea about that?" He narrowed his eyes and said, "Mom, what are you talking about? Did you think I was going to keep you in here for the rest of your life? I just thought it might be a good idea to have you stay here for a little bit. I was fixing up a place for you to live in the meantime. But be honest. It's nice here, isn't it? You don't need to worry about money since I'm paying for you to be here. You have a place to stay that gives you meals and you don't have to pay for it. Do you realize how lucky you are? Whatever. Anyway, your house is ready now. You should check yourself out of here and move in as soon as you can. Don't say I never did anything for you. Here. Wear this tomorrow. Come to the address I wrote down on the piece of paper inside. Got it? He set the bag down on the table, turned around, and left. I let out a sigh as I saw him walk away. As much as I didn't want to go meet his next wife, I felt like it was my duty as a parent. I did what my son asked me. I put on the clothes my son bought me, got permission to leave the facility, and went to meet with him and his girlfriend. I got there a little early. I sat next to my son, waiting for his girlfriend and her parents to get there. I was feeling mixed emotions. I thought I'd only have to do this once. I wouldn't necessarily say that I felt nervous. I was much more curious than anything else. If my son was telling the truth about his girlfriend's parents not being bothered by his divorce, I was eager to see what kind of people they were. At the same time, I wanted to get this meeting over with. I wanted to go and see the new house my son claimed to have had built for me. They arrived right on time. They made their way into the restaurant. I couldn't believe who was walking through the door. The moment I saw them, I ran right up to them and grabbed them by the hand. The woman who walked through the door was my dear friend June, who I met in the facility. She said to me, "I can't believe it. I had no idea we'd be meeting you. I never thought in a million years we'd be seeing each other again so soon, especially like this. How have you been? I'm sorry I haven't been able to get in touch with you. Ever since I left the facility, it's been tough to find the time. We chatted for a bit to catch up. Are you still at the facility? How has it been lately? Is that head nurse still there? I hope she's doing well too. I always liked her. She and I would always pass the time talking with one another. I was quite fond of her. I really should go back and visit. I miss everyone there. Talking with you makes me feel like we're back in our room together. You look wonderful, by the way." As we were talking, my son cut into our conversation. "Do you two really know each other?" I laughed and said, "Of course we know each other. She was my best friend in the facility. Maybe in my whole life, to be frank. I'm over the moon to be able to see her again." I turned to my friend to find her with a look of concern on her face. My friend pulled out my chair for me to sit down and said, "Why don't we continue this conversation while we eat? Let's all have a seat." I quickly remembered the real reason why we had all gotten together. I turned to my friend's husband and daughter and apologized for delaying things. I apologized for holding things up. "It's a pleasure you meet you." My friend immediately started her line of questioning to my son. "Nick, where did your mom come from to be here today? Didn't you tell me she lived outside the city in the country?" That's the impression I was under. My son seemed a bit panicky and responded, "Well, yes, she does live out in the country, but she's been in a bad way in recent years and hasn't been able to take care of herself. She's been in the assisted living facility for a few months. I had a house built for her outside of the city. I was planning to have her live there once her condition got better. Even though we don't get to see each other much anymore, we're really close." He put on a cheap smile and held my hand. I said nothing and lowered my eyes towards the table. When I looked up, I saw my friend was staring at me. Her eyes were stern, and I could tell her jaw muscles were tightened. After a few seconds, she said, "I'm not exactly sure what to do here. If I'm being completely honest, I want to throw my glass of water in your son's face right now." She turned to my son. "It's taking all my strength to hold back the anger I'm feeling knowing what you've done to your mother. I'll let this pass once, but never show your face around me again." She turned back to me. "I'm sorry. I had no idea he was your son. If I had known my daughter was dating your son, I would have never agreed to meet here today. I wouldn't have been so open-minded about him being divorced once already. Especially after he forced you into assisted living and thought he had wiped his hands clean of you. How could I ever give my daughter over to such a horrible man like him? Let's finish up here. There's nothing more to discuss. She grabbed her daughter's hand and got up. She turned to her and said, "Get up. We're leaving. Don't you even think about trying to convince me otherwise. I absolutely forbid you from marrying that man." They walked out the door. My son stood up like he was about to chase after them. He glared at me and said, "Look what you did. What did you say to her about me? I've never seen her worked up like that before. This is all your fault. Do you have any idea who that family is? They own a super successful business, and she's their only daughter. You've ruined my life once again. How could you do this to me?" I'm about to snap. "Why did you have to go and open your mouth to the other people at the facility? Were you that lonely? You should have told me you made a friend while you were there, especially if it's a big shot like her. Or did you know all along about her and you were hiding it from me on purpose? You've been nothing but a burden to me my whole life." He got up and left me alone at the restaurant. He ran out the door to chase after my friend and her family. At that moment, a thought floated through my head. For a split second, I thought to myself, should I go and run out to apologize to my friend? Should I go and say I made up everything about my son? Should I say he's really not that type of person and I lied about everything? I could take everything I said back and to try and fix this. I could try and make everything back to the way it was going to be. Those thoughts remained as thoughts, though. I got up from my seat and walked out of the restaurant. I went back to the facility, got my things together, and checked myself out for good. I got on a Greyhound bus bound for the country. I was headed for the house my son said that he had built for me. On my way there, my phone kept vibrating from my son's incessant calls. I never picked up. I figured he'd eventually show up at my house and throw a tantrum, so there was no need to talk with him. I could imagine what he was going to say to me anyway, so I saved myself the trouble and ignored his calls. Even if it was just for a brief moment, I wanted to spare myself from his selfish and abusive rants. Being back out in the country where I belong recharged me. I had never lived in a brand new house like this before. It was tucked away in the mountains. I was beat from tidying up the house after moving in. That night, I had the greatest sleep of my life. I slept like a baby. I wasn't sure if it was because of being tired from cleaning or if I finally had peace of mind about being somewhere I belonged. I awoke to the gentle morning light the next day. It felt like I had been asleep for a week. 5 years have gone by since that day at the restaurant with my friend and her family. In an unexpected turn of events, my son hasn't come to my house or even called me since then. Not even once. I had prepared myself for him to come over and put on one of his classic outbursts about why I'm a terrible person. It reminded me of back when he ran away at 17 and cut contact with me for 10 whole years. No calls, no visits, no contact. I think he'd finally cut me out of his life for good. Recently, I've been busy out in a field I've made near my house. I've planted some vegetables and have been tending to them to pass the time. I've even been able to sell some of the things I've grown at local markets. I'm more active than I've been in years. It feels like I finally got a foothold in life, and I'm enjoying being alive. They say that people start a second life once they turn 60. I'm a little late to the party. Be that as it may, I'm going to go at my own pace and spend my remaining years in happiness. I'm praying for all of you to find peace and happiness in your lives as well.